This is also a moment of profound change for my family. Catherine. She becomes queen consort in recognition of her own loyal public service. But what happened next left everyone in that great hall completely stunned. No one there could understand why a second crown had suddenly been positioned beside the throne. Not even the senior members of the royal family, sitting only a few feet away. Not the palace staff. Not even the constitutional experts who had spent decades studying the machinery of the monarchy. And yet, King Charles knew exactly what he was doing. He slowly rose to his feet, moving more carefully and deliberately than anyone had ever seen before. He reached for the crown, turned toward Catherine, and then placed it upon her shoulders. For a moment, everything stopped. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, and at that exact instant, complete silence fell across the chamber. No one spoke. No one moved. There had been no public warning, no official press release, no notification sent to broadcasters. No alert had gone beyond the palace gates. The meeting itself had been kept completely private. Somewhere inside one of Britain's oldest royal rooms, a quiet gathering had taken place, and the atmosphere inside that room carried the unmistakable feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. King Charles had personally requested the presence of a very select group. Senior members of the royal family were there. Experienced constitutional advisors were there. Palace officials who had served the crown for decades were there. But none of them fully understood just how significant that gathering would become. Catherine arrived quietly. There were no press cameras waiting for her. No advance information had been handed to the tabloids. No spectacle surrounded her arrival. She simply walked into the room with the same grace and composure that had become part of her public image over the years, carrying herself as though she had already learned how to live beneath the weight of millions of watching eyes. Then King Charles entered, and the atmosphere changed immediately. Those who were present later described the feeling as almost physical, like the strange silence that comes just before a storm. Charles looked well, perhaps even better than some had expected. But there was something else in his expression. He seemed to understand that time was not unlimited. Buckingham Palace had announced on February 5, 2024, that the king had been diagnosed with cancer. Then, in December 2025, he revealed that his treatment had moved into a more cautious phase, something his medical team described as a significant milestone. He spoke about it in a video message connected with Channel 4's Stand Up to Cancer campaign. And he spoke not simply as a monarch, but as someone who had personally experienced the reality of cancer. That mattered, because as Charles stood at the head of that room, he paused for several long seconds. Everyone remained completely still, and then he turned. He looked directly at Catherine. What happened next was far more than a ceremonial gesture. It was an affirmation. A message was being delivered without the need for a speech. For years, everyone had understood the legal order of succession. William would inherit the throne. After William would come George. That part had never been in question. But Charles was doing something different. He was not simply acknowledging succession. He was acknowledging leadership. He was recognizing something he believed had already become visible to the public: Catherine's ability to represent the monarchy during a period of uncertainty. He stepped forward. And with that single action, he appeared to communicate everything he wanted the people to understand. Hi viewers, do you respect King Charles for publicly recognizing Princess Catherine as the emotional leader and one of the most powerful figures in the modern monarchy? Yes or no? If you believe Catherine represents the future of the crown, put yes in the comments. Because what happened inside that room was not something people were prepared to see. There are certain rooms that seem to hold the memory of important moments. This was one of them. The actual gesture lasted only a few seconds, but the meaning behind it could potentially last for years. And when word of the event began moving through the palace's carefully controlled communication network, the reaction across Britain followed a remarkably similar pattern. First, silence. Then, relief. And to understand why Charles would make such a decision, you have to understand what the monarchy lost when Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8, 2022, at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Her death left behind something much larger than an empty throne. Queen Elizabeth had represented stability. She represented experience. She represented continuity. For decades, the entire institution had revolved around her presence. When she died, Britain did not simply lose a monarch. It lost one of its most familiar points of reference. And ever since that moment, the monarchy has faced a difficult question: who could help fill the emotional space that Queen Elizabeth had occupied for so long? Charles inherited that challenge. His coronation at Westminster Abbey on May 6, 2023, marked the beginning of a completely new chapter. It was a historic occasion. But the coronation also brought Charles into an uncomfortable reality. For the first time in modern history, a newly crowned king was facing serious health concerns almost immediately after taking the throne. In February 2024, it became known that Charles was dealing with cancer. Yet despite his health problems, he continued working. During the early months of 2024, he stepped back from some public duties while receiving treatment. But his constitutional responsibilities continued. He signed documents. He received briefings. He carried out official duties. And during 2025, he reportedly completed 535 public engagements, making him one of the hardest working members of the royal family that year. But hard work alone could not answer the monarchy's most important long-term question: who would provide the emotional leadership the institution needed in the years ahead? The legal answer was simple. Prince William comes after Charles. Prince George comes after William. The succession was clear. But leadership is not always the same thing as legal succession. And Charles understood that distinction. He had been watching Catherine closely. He had seen how she performed during formal royal occasions. He had watched her connect with crowds. But more importantly, he had watched how she responded when circumstances became difficult. Catherine's own health battle changed the way the public viewed her. In March 2024, she revealed that she had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing preventive chemotherapy. For months, she remained away from public life. And when she eventually began returning, she did so carefully, with dignity and restraint. She never appeared to use her illness as a way to gain attention. Instead, she simply focused on her family, her recovery, and her responsibilities. Royal analysts noticed. Richard Fitzwilliams described Catherine as an essential part of the monarchy as it moved toward 2026. A source described as being close to the palace portrayed her as someone who had spent years developing the qualities needed to make a smooth transition into greater responsibility, learning from the example of Queen Elizabeth II. And then there was something else: her influence. The phenomenon often referred to as the Kate effect demonstrated just how powerful her public presence could be. Items she wore could sell out rapidly. Her influence extended far beyond fashion. And in 2026, Catherine became the first Princess of Wales in more than a century to issue royal warrants, a responsibility that had not been exercised by a Princess of Wales for generations. These were not isolated moments. Together, they created a picture. Charles could see it. Catherine was already demonstrating many of the qualities associated with leadership, and perhaps that was why he chose to recognize her. But none of this was supposed to become public in advance. Behind the scenes, the palace had been undergoing subtle changes. There were discussions. There were private meetings. There were quiet preparations. And almost none of it was visible to the cameras and reporters who followed the royal family every day. That is how the British monarchy has often operated. Important decisions are frequently discussed quietly, carefully, and only revealed once everything has been prepared. Sources close to the palace claimed that discussions took place between King Charles, Prince William, and a small group of senior constitutional advisors. Some of those conversations reportedly took place at Highgrove and later at Buckingham Palace. The subject was not simply medical succession. Instead, attention was focused on something more subtle: the public perception of the monarchy's future. And during those conversations, Catherine's name came up repeatedly. There was never really any doubt that she would eventually become queen. The question was different. Could she provide strong, approachable leadership during a period of growing uncertainty? That was the issue being considered. The monarchy was preparing not only for the distant future, but for the immediate future as well. The palace closely watched public approval. During 2024 and 2025, the picture was complicated. Charles was respected. Camilla was becoming increasingly accepted. William was highly trusted. But Catherine was loved. There appeared to be a different kind of connection between her and the public. A connection that polls could not always fully explain. Her public appearances gradually increased. Her role as Colonel of the Irish Guards became particularly significant. In 2026, during the St. Patrick's Day event at Mons Barracks in Aldershot, she demonstrated the warmth, confidence, and knowledge expected from someone carrying an increasingly important royal role. Then came the royal warrants. The announcement that Catherine would become the first Princess of Wales in 116 years to grant them was carefully timed. The Times was told by sources that Catherine wanted to support British skills and industries. She approached the responsibility seriously, not as a symbolic exercise, but as a genuine responsibility. Each step seemed natural, and that was one of the palace's greatest skills, making major changes appear almost effortless. But behind that effortless appearance was a complicated process. William was involved in the decisions. The king's advisors considered the constitutional implications, and the central question was no longer whether Catherine deserved greater recognition. It was, how should that recognition be given? And what would it actually mean? That is why so many people outside the inner circle were reportedly surprised by the way Charles chose to make the announcement. He could have issued a formal statement. He could have allowed a press secretary to make the announcement. He could have released a carefully prepared document. But Charles wanted something more personal. He wanted it to happen in a room, during a gathering, through an action. And when that moment finally came, everything unfolded exactly as he had apparently intended. Then there was another part of Catherine's story that made the moment even more powerful: her battle with cancer. On March 22, 2024, Catherine released a video message to the world. She was sitting in a quiet garden in Windsor. She wore a simple striped shirt. There was no elaborate royal setting, no grand ceremony, no dramatic stage. She spoke directly and honestly about her diagnosis and her preventive chemotherapy. And the world stopped to listen. Something changed after that. For years, Catherine had been the subject of intense tabloid attention. Her clothes were analyzed. Her appearances were discussed. Her every movement could become a headline. But during her illness, the tone began to change. The public did not simply want photographs. They wanted to know that she was okay. They wanted reassurance. They were waiting. They were worrying. And many people began seeing something they had not fully seen before: a human being. Catherine withdrew from public life to focus on her health and the well-being of her 3 children. For months, the world waited. Her medical details remained private in accordance with the palace's approach to health announcements. Information was only released when it was considered significant. Then, in September 2024, Catherine completed her preventive chemotherapy. Her return to public life was gradual. Carefully chosen appearances replaced a full schedule. She selected meaningful events. She avoided unnecessary commitments. Everything was measured. Then, in January 2026, came the news people had been hoping for. She was in remission. 2 words. That's all it took. Across Britain and beyond, those 2 words brought an enormous sense of relief. And something else happened too. The public perception of Catherine changed. After her illness, she appeared more human, but also more powerful. Before, some people had viewed her as highly polished, controlled, almost untouchable. But her experience changed that image. Her family remained close. Her marriage remained strong. Her sense of duty remained intact. She had faced something no royal upbringing could truly prepare someone for, and she came through it. Her compassion for others never disappeared. If anything, her experience seemed to deepen it. And without necessarily intending to, she developed an even stronger emotional connection with the public. It was different from the relationship the monarchy had experienced since Diana. This was built around vulnerability, resilience, and the shared understanding of what it means to face fear and uncertainty. Millions watched Catherine step away. Millions watched her return. And they saw someone who had been tested and had emerged stronger. Charles saw it too. He understood illness. He had been dealing with cancer at the same time. He also understood something fundamental about the monarchy. Real strength is not the absence of weakness. Real strength can exist alongside vulnerability. And Catherine had demonstrated that. No one could simply dismiss what she had achieved as clever public relations, or the work of stylists, or carefully managed palace communications. Something real had happened, and what is real tends to last. Then came the constitutional question, the moment that reportedly left people in Westminster paying very close attention. Britain's constitution is different from the constitutions of most major democracies. There is no single written document containing the entire system. Instead, the British constitutional structure is made up of laws, traditions, judicial decisions, conventions, and centuries of established practice. That flexibility allows the system to evolve without necessarily changing the law itself. Charles understands that world extremely well. And importantly, his ceremony with Catherine did not legally change the line of succession. William remained the heir. George remained next after William. The law did not suddenly change. The constitutional framework remained intact. But something less formal may have changed. Something potentially more powerful. The monarchy's influence does not come from controlling Parliament. Its real strength comes from visibility, symbolism, and the emotional connection between the institution and the public. People want a figure who can represent continuity. Queen Elizabeth understood that better than almost anyone. She did not need to control Parliament to be powerful. Her influence came from occupying a position that no politician could replicate. And this was where Charles's gesture toward Catherine became so significant. He did not rewrite the law. He did not change succession. He did not remove William from his position. Instead, he appeared to elevate Catherine in the eyes of the public as an important emotional leader of the monarchy. That kind of influence cannot simply be written into a legal document. It has to be earned. And Catherine had spent years earning it. Parliament's reaction was characteristically British. Reserved in public, but closely watched behind the scenes. Political figures from different parties acknowledged Catherine's importance to the institution. The idea that strengthening her position could benefit the monarchy was viewed by many as a sensible modernization. One senior government official, speaking anonymously, described the situation as a necessary and timely modernization of the monarchy. Another political observer emphasized Catherine's ability to bring people together, especially during a time when Britain was experiencing division and mistrust. Outside Westminster, members of the public began discussing the constitutional implications with the same fascination Britain has always shown toward royal affairs. Some believed Charles's decision became more powerful precisely because it was informal. There was no lengthy statement, no complicated protocol, no carefully constructed public ceremony. Instead, there was a room, a small gathering, a crown placed differently, a king dealing with illness, and a daughter-in-law returning from her own health battle. Sometimes, history is written in exactly these kinds of moments. Quiet moments. Moments that are not fully documented until years later. And sometimes, a moment is so significant that the people witnessing it understand immediately that they are watching history. This was one of those moments. The reaction spread across Britain. Newspapers discussed it. Tabloids discussed it. Constitutional experts examined it. People who had watched Catherine grow from a young student into a Princess of Wales began looking at her differently. Because this was not simply a crown being placed beside a throne. It represented something larger. Charles appeared to be signaling where he believed the emotional future of the monarchy could lie. But what does King Charles's final public act truly mean for Britain's future? Every monarch eventually faces the same fundamental question. What did you build? The question of who succeeds them is already determined by law and birth. Their legacy is something else. Their legacy is about what they leave behind. King Charles III has not yet finished writing that story. He remains on the throne. He continues his formal responsibilities. He meets visiting heads of state. He continues his work. His medical treatment moved into a precautionary phase toward the end of 2025. And as he entered 2026, he maintained a full schedule. That tells us something important. He does not appear willing to allow illness to define his reign before he has had the opportunity to shape it himself. In a video message for the Stand Up to Cancer campaign in December 2025, he spoke about the importance of early diagnosis and described the reduction in his treatment as both a personal blessing and a reflection of advances in cancer care. His words suggested that he was not preparing to disappear from public life. Quite the opposite. He appeared determined to use whatever time, authority, and platform he still possessed. And his relationship with Catherine reveals something about the legacy he may want to leave behind. This is no longer simply about constitutional technicalities. It is about perception. It is about what people believe the monarchy represents. Because for the monarchy to survive, people have to believe it still matters. They have to believe it still serves a purpose. And Catherine represents a version of royalty that many people can connect with. She does not need to appear flawless. She does not need to appear unreachable. Her experience with illness showed the public the person behind the title. She faced intense scrutiny. She stepped away. She recovered. And then she returned to work with a clear sense of purpose. At the beginning of 2026, a 10-year-old girl named Adrian reportedly approached Catherine at Evelina London Children's Hospital and asked whether she was the Queen. Catherine paused. She smiled and responded with warmth and humanity. It was a simple moment. But that moment spread across the internet, and perhaps it said more about Catherine than any formal title ever could. Because when a child looks at you and sees not a distant institution, but a person, that tells you something about the connection you have created. Eventually, William will become king. George will one day succeed him. That part remains unchanged. The monarchy has survived wars, crises, scandals, and enormous social change. But simply having a line of succession is not enough. The institution also needs relevance. It needs connection. And most importantly, people across Britain need to feel that the institution still belongs to them. That is where Charles's decision becomes so important to his legacy. He did not simply recognize the person who was destined to become queen. He appeared to recognize the person he believed could help carry the monarchy's emotional relevance into the future. Not because she was required to do it, but because she had already been doing it. Catherine had already been living the answer to a question the monarchy has been asking for generations. How do you remain relevant to the people you represent? And Charles's answer was Catherine. There was no dramatic national announcement, no thunderous speech, no legal revolution. Instead, Britain seemed to absorb the meaning quietly, almost like a nation finally releasing a breath it had been holding. Because perhaps that is how the most significant acts of a monarch are sometimes carried out. Not with noise, but with trust. A monarch eventually has to hand responsibility forward to someone capable of carrying it. And when King Charles looked at Catherine, he may have seen more than the future queen. He may have seen the future of the public's belief in the monarchy itself. And that could become one of the most important parts of his legacy. Viewers, if you agree that King Charles's greatest legacy may not be the laws he passed, but his decision to place the future relevance of the monarchy in the hands of Princess Catherine, put yes in the comments. And if this story struck a chord with you, like this video, share it and subscribe right now. Because this monarchy, Catherine, William, and the future of the crown still have a great deal ahead. We may only be witnessing the beginning of the next chapter